Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Taking Stock Live, where we do just that. We take stock with some of the brightest minds, the biggest thought leaders, and certainly people that have influenced me and the Microsoft team as we think about what's next for retail. And today we're really bringing things together. We have someone that I have really had a chance to see lead and help transform and inform retail leaders here in the U.S., really the CEOs in the U.S., Brian Dodge. Brian is the president of RILA, which is the Retail Industry Leadership Association. And I am really privileged. I recently joined the board of RILA, and I'll tell all of our viewers out there, for me, it has been just a privilege to frankly sort of sit and listen and learn on what's really going on in the minds of these CEOs. Brian himself, he is a veteran of public affairs. I always hesitate using the word veteran, but when you look at his background, it's true. He's served on Capitol Hill and has been on the staff of 2 Massachusetts governors. He was the former executive director of the Massachusetts Republican Party and a frequent guest on radio and television. So we're expecting to see all of those broadcast skills come to life today, Brian. And you really know your way around navigating for leaders across the nation on how to work with government and really come to the best policy decisions. So huge welcome to you today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm just as honored to be with you as you are to be on our board. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So first off, maybe just share with our viewers out there, what does it mean to be the president of RILA?
Oh, gosh. Well, it meant something different, I think, in 2019 than it did in 2020, for sure. But I think you summed it up pretty well. We have an opportunity to work with the leaders of the largest retailers operating in the U.S. to help them navigate the biggest challenges and opportunities that they have. Some of them are public policy, many of them are operational. And so my job is to interact with those leaders to make sure that we have a sense of what those big issues are, and that we have a plan to advance the industry's priorities in all those areas. So it's a lot of fun. Some days are more fun than others, but the last year has been an incredible learning experience. I'm blessed to have the opportunity to work with these leaders who are incredibly thoughtful. This is retail, so they're customer first. They're incredibly friendly and approachable, and so they've been great partners to me, and I've learned a ton being around them for the last 13 years, but certainly intensely the last year.
Well, that is an understatement, I would imagine, because when I was getting ready for you today, Brian, I didn't realize you had been the COO, but you actually took the helm as president of RILA in January of 2020. And I can only imagine the difference of what you would say about your role from January 2020 to January 2021, where you really have, brought these CEOs together to have very frank discussions around everything from the social injustice that we saw really affect all of our stores firsthand to obviously navigating today, even mask rules and regulations. But how would you say, what has the journey been like, and what have some of the lessons you've learned?
Sure. Well, I'll start with the most important lesson, which is that people are drawn to community. They want to have a community of peers. I think, the challenges of last year were so unique and so unprecedented that there was no handbook for people to refer to. There was no member of the board who had gone through this before, some mentor who could tell them exactly what to do. And so they were eager to get around one another and check each other's gut. Do I have the same information that everybody else does? Am I thinking about it the same way as everybody else? And in the areas where the laws allow us to truly coordinate, an opportunity to actually plan things together. And that was really rich. We started in the issue for us was in January, it started as a supply chain issue, how we were going to get product out of China and here to the US for springtime shopping or whatever summertime products. Obviously, that changed dramatically in February, and we found ourselves we maintain about 40 different communities of the leaders from all the different major disciplines across the retail enterprise. And we started hosting conversations with each one of those groups in those late days of February, just to understand, this was even before a pandemic had been declared, trying to understand what were the questions that these leaders were being asked to solve for their companies? How were they thinking through the impact that a growing pandemic could have domestically on their areas of operation. And very quickly, those became conversations about dealing with the crisis as it was unfolding. And so those communities met regularly throughout the year, from heads of asset protection and stores all the way up to the CEOs. And they continue to meet regularly. So that community is incredibly important for this group. It was for COVID, it was for racial injustice, and it's been for all the issues that have fallen from there.
Yeah, I'm so glad you used that word community, because I would say that's one of the things that has really struck me in joining the board is here are these businesses that, in the market, frankly, compete, and we know that. But then when you show up on a RILA call, it is a community of, how are we going to collectively, navigate for the better of, local economies and the employees. I think the community of employees has been something that has really been top of mind for all of these leaders.
Absolutely. We're talking now about how the mask guidance will impact protocols in stores and, the focus of all retailers, which is the safety of their employees and their guests. I've said this many times. You've heard me say this. I'll say it to your audience as well, that I've always been struck with all of our communities, but most particularly the CEOs over this last year, that we might have on the agenda some nuanced operational issue that we're going to discuss. But the conversation winds very quickly to people. What does this mean for our employees? How do we keep them safe? How do we keep our guests safe? How do we communicate clearly what's happening and what they can do to help? I mean, that is where we always end up. And that has been really a great thing for me to see. And it's been, again, a really strong learning for me about what really matters at the end of the day. Obviously businesses need to perform well, but it's the people who matter. Everything comes from the people.
I couldn't agree more. And so to that end, we'll talk about sort of your views on the changing retail landscape in a second, but you've had such a year and such a career. What sort of advice, 20 years might be too far because you're a young guy, but maybe 10, 15 years, what advice would you give, Brian Dodge 10, 15 years ago to where you are right now?
Plan a trip towards the end of 2019, because 2020 is going to be tough. I think I would say two things. I would say, one, that there's lessons and learnings in everything. Even the worst experiences, you're going to learn something that's really important. And two, and I've really, I think, come to appreciate this more so in the last year, that arbitrary deadlines should be ignored. That, good decisions are made in their right time. And so let information come to you. It'll be clear when you have to make a decision, but don't set an arbitrary date or time to make a decision if there's nothing really driving it. I think, good decisions are made with good information, and wait for that information to come.
Such good advice, and I like the idea of having planned a trip at the end of 2020. But really, yes, and on the second one in particular, I think we often feel the need to react quickly, but good decisions sometimes do take more time.
Sometimes you have to make a decision. Sometimes there's no choice, right? You got to go. You got what you got, and you go with it. But I think more times than not, I've benefited in the last year, taking a breath, seeing if I can gather more information, and then we go.
Yeah, I use myself even the 24-hour rule. Just sleep on it. It's so basic, yeah. But when I feel stuck, I do find out if I can get up, have a workout, and then sometimes it just becomes clearer to me. Yeah,
it's good.
So let's talk about the changing face of the consumer, because as much as the world of retail is changing, in many ways we're actually responding to this ever-changing, increasingly demanding consumer. So in what ways are you seeing that in your role as the president of RILA, and how you're working with your constituencies to meet the face of the changing consumer?
Yeah, so it's funny, if you go back, the conversations that I was having in May, June of last year, it was what's going to be different on the other side of this? What will have changed as a result of the pandemic and customers trying new things and expecting different things? And I think the conversation has changed to how have things accelerated since prior to the pandemic, because I don't think that there's a lot that is truly new in consumer expectations. It's just everything has been dialed up considerably. So as I said to others, the good news is up is still up and down is still down, but everything's a little bit more extra than it was than before the pandemic. So we knew that that customers were increasingly expecting personalization. Well, that's tenfold now. That they wanted fast delivery, and in most cases, they want even faster delivery, or they want precise delivery. We can talk about more of that in a moment. The role of digital has accelerated considerably, and it's not just about growth of e-commerce. It's the contribution of digital to the shopping experience, whether it's in the store or online or wherever it may be. So all of these things have just been dialed up. And when you look at businesses, there were some who were already, based on insights of the company insights or balance sheet, they were already progressing to maximize their success in those key areas. And they're the ones who have had some of the greatest success over the course of the last year, because it was about, customers wanted all of these things, just a whole lot more of it in the middle of the pandemic. And so everyone else is now catching up and making their own proper investments in order to get to that place. So, on the other side of this, digital will be a much bigger component of retail. We will have higher e-commerce. Where it sits ultimately, kind of where it settles down to, I think is a bit of a mystery right now. But it almost doesn't matter, because people are going to start their shopping experience on their iPhone or on their mobile device, and they're going to complete it in the store in some way. They're going to be expecting to know exactly when. I got a delivery today, and I got a text message from the delivery company. It is at your doorstep, exactly when they said it was going to be there. So that's the kind of thing that I think consumers are going to expect, and businesses are going to have to keep up to make sure that they're delivering that experience.
It's so true. And the framing of the question from not what's changed, but what's accelerated, I think that is the thing I've seen as well, is those who sort of laid those digital tracks earlier were able to meet the acceleration faster. But digital, in fact, to your point, is not an e-commerce transition. It's actually in the physical store. Most of when we're looking at actually the growth of e-commerce and the growth of digital sales, a lot of it's happening curbside, or like in the blurring of the omni-channel experience, which we have been talking about for a while.
It turns out that a lot of the things that businesses did in those early days when they were trying to develop contactless options, they were really also developing very convenient options. Curbside is incredibly convenient. It's costly also, which is something that retailers need to figure out how to manage the costs on. But that's what customers are going to be drawn to. And I think, we always think about in retail that there are periods in people's lives when their loyalties are kind of tossed up, and that businesses can compete for your business. Well, that was certainly the case last year. Right? Everybody, they were shopping fewer stores. We'll see whether that continues. But there was a desire for people to interact with fewer people and go into confined places. And so they looked for convenience wherever they could find it. And retailers developed really terrific options to provide them that.
Absolutely. And I think the speed, at which we had one retailer customer, Microsoft's, who had a 3-year roadmap for, buy online, pick up at store. Then they made it pick up at curb, and they did it in 18 days. And so, I think it wasn't perfect. And to your point, it's very costly for them right now. But I think in a way they sort of sorted out what they're capable of culturally, which was the biggest barrier of all.
And I'm sure you've experienced that at Microsoft as well. The confidence that comes from recognizing that you can do big things faster is going to last. Maybe we shouldn't do everything that was planned for 3 years and 18 days.
Correct.
But knowing that you can do it if the circumstances require you to is a pretty big lift. And I think the confidence that comes from that, the leaders that have been proven through this difficult time will have great careers on the other side of this. I mean, there's a lot of, the pandemic was bad, full stop. But there are these silver linings that I think are going to serve us all quite well in the future.
Absolutely. And it's how do we take those silver linings and then take away the things that are obviously, weren't good or healthy for anybody. You did speak about sort of the cost of last mile, and I think that those expectations are only increasing on the side of the consumer. Will you talk a little bit about the gig economy and how you think about it with RILA and obviously the constituents?
Yeah, so I should note, as part of the exercise to understand what the pandemic will mean to retail long term, we partnered with McKinsey & Company to interview CEOs and practitioners across the retail enterprise to identify what are those key areas of focus for the next several years to come. And there were 7. You can take a look at it. Your audience can take a look at it on our website, RILA.org/retail speaks. Feel free to go right on there and find it. But one of the areas was around human resources, and we can talk about some of the others, but the changing needs of the workforce and expectations of workers, and also the changing needs of retailers. And the gig economy has and will continue to play an important role in all of that. It is clear that, as we looked at last year at peaks, right, there was suddenly a incredible need for employees to work in those stores that were defined as essential. And I hate that essential versus non-essential designation, but it's common jargon. So grocery stores and folks like that. And there's no way for them to hire enough employees to fit that demand. And so some of them turn to gig economy workers to help even staff in stores, which was a huge revelation. Generally, it's been used for last mile. And to great effect. And so as we think about the retail industry going forward, I anticipate that will be a larger share, that will be more widely utilized. I don't know if I can say larger share, but more widely utilized, because it allows you to flex up, flex down quickly. And we already knew going into all of this that retailers were competing. The people who wanted to work in gig jobs were the same people who were taking retail jobs because they saw opportunities for flexibility. And so many of those employees who work for a company would be happy in a gig role as well, because it would give them more flexibility in their life and to sort of define their own shifts. So there's lots that we're trying to do to sort of streamline the regulatory rules to allow this to happen more robustly. There's a lot of work to be done there, but in the near term, there's a lot of interest in this. And I think, there's small and big versions of it. There is some sort of internal frameworks. There's some companies that have kind of a gig economy among their own employees. They can shift from stores to distribution centers to last mile if they choose to. So lots of innovation coming in that for sure. And I should be asking you that question. You're probably going to have more insights than me.
I don't know if I will. I think what you said is absolutely right. I sort of look at, I guess I start with our mission statement, which is empowering every person, every organization on the planet to achieve more. And I think about, then I go back to myself, my first job was in retail, working in a store. I look at my teenage sons. I think that, first off, the value of working, whether it's in a store or in a gig economy, is something everybody should participate in. And I'm really happy to see the dialogue happening, with the RILA community on how we make it part of our strategy versus consider it, as you said, it's not just about last mile. Right. It can be about in the physical store. It can be around in the distribution center. So I'm happy to see the discussion moving, because I think in some ways, and we have work to do, obviously on the public policy side, but in some ways the boundaries or the silos are in our heads versus the reality of what's out there.
I think particularly as it relates to direct interaction with customers, I think there's this belief out there that maybe you can't train these individuals to be good representatives of your brand.
Right.
Maybe that's true, but I think there's examples already that say that that's not the case, that you can actually have a great, enthusiastic employee who happens to be a gig worker.
The first interaction you and I had, Brian, where in the early days of the pandemic, and I too really dislike the sort of essential versus non-essential designation, but we did matter-of-factly see essential retailers open and surging and non-essential not, and the opportunity to do like effective kind of labor swaps there, as an industry to keep people employed and with benefits. I think that is what the future holds for all of us, and to the extent that technology can be helpful there, to me that's a good use of the capability that exists today.
Yeah, for sure, and that was great innovation in those early days, for sure.
Yeah. Now another one that's I think a hot topic, and I don't think is going away, is ESG, and sort of in the conversations that you're having with retail leaders, where do you think it's going?
So it's a great question. It also was identified as one of the key issues for retailers in our research work with McKinsey. It is here to stay. The acronym may be new, but there's lots of elements of it that have been a part of the retail thinking for some time. One of my first tasks when I came to RILA was to help launch our sustainability effort. So that was 2007. So retailers were already committed to advancing sustainability then. And at that point, it was largely a packaging issue. It was cost reductions based on limiting packaging, limiting truck shipments, and so forth. It has gone through multiple iterations since then, such that businesses now look at their carbon footprint across their entire supply chain, not just the elements of it that are owned by their business. They think about the product for its entire life cycle. So what the components of its manufacturing, all the way to what happens when it is no longer used by a customer. So that has evolved greatly. The governance expectations have increased considerably over the years, not just from government, but from investors. And of course, last year has shown us the importance of engaging on the social level. So every company is at a different place on their journey around ESG, but all have come to recognize the important role that it plays in the long-term sustainability of their business. So big S sustainability, not just environmental sustainability, but the sustainability and success of their business long-term. We can now quantify that businesses that focus on these issues in areas that are core to the business do perform better. And there's no escaping the investors who believe that way. So the ship has, if anybody is still saying ESG is a fad, I assure them it is not. It is here to stay. And so the task now, I think, for retailers, and what we spend a lot of time talking about with our members, is identifying the elements that kind of fall into these categories that are most relevant to your business, but more importantly, most relevant to the key stakeholders of your business, your employees, your investors, your customers, and having a plan and aligning your efforts around a purpose to make progress on those issues. No single company can do all things and do them all exceptionally well. So pick the issues that you're going to focus on and do a really good job at it, and it'll iterate over time. So it's been a really interesting issue for me to see up close. I've watched the evolution. It accelerated tremendously last year. I'll share comments from one CEO when I asked him about ESG. He sort of threw up his arms and said, "Of course ESG is important, but not each element of it is equally as important at all times. Today, maybe the employees are the most important based on what the circumstances around us, but we'll shift, and it may be our customers, and we'll be able to navigate these issues. But we know that we have to be committed to this, and we have to be thinking through the lens of a broader ESG vision."
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the place where I've seen you in action, and you've added so much value, is working with these CEOs on, the conversation. Number one, like, do I designate someone to lead this internally? Like, so how do I kind of, to your point about structure, how do I structure this? And two, and a place where we work with retailers a lot as well, is how do I measure it? Because if you don't know sort of who's accountable and how you're going to measure it, then you don't really have a strategy against it. And that's why I've seen such great collaboration sort of with the RILA community in doing these things.
Yeah, and I think they're excited to share with one another and learn from each other. I always, with our communities, I say at any given point, each person is a student and a teacher. So there's lots of opportunity. When I think long term on it, there's a lot of need for harmonization of terminology around metrics. Not everyone's going to be measuring the same things, but certainly from the perspective of how businesses are evaluated, or I should say more specifically, how retailers are evaluated, because retailers are different from manufacturers, are different from banks, right? There has to be kind of a way to look at an industry and not kind of throw them all in together. Because once you can get alignment around those things, then you can really show progress over time. And then the conversation between investors and business leaders just becomes a more productive one.
Absolutely. So as we sort of close out and you think about your advice, because you get the privilege of really talking to CEOs every day. Maybe some days it doesn't, it feels like more of a privilege than others, and also working within the construct of our public affairs. What would be your advice for retailers, or top 2 to 3 things, especially as sort of we get through the latter half of 2021?
Yeah, maybe I'll choose 2. One, I'll go back to community. There's a peer group out there from which you can learn, and that you'll be able to bring real nuggets of insights and value to your peers. And I think generally speaking, the senior most executives have discovered that. But anybody who's lingering out there, there's an opportunity in community. The second is, the retail industry is not a traditionally regulated industry in the sense of, oil and gas or banks, where any decision they make needs to go through government. So there's a history where retailers have not been particularly enthusiastic about engaging in policymaking. I would discourage that point of view and encourage one of engagement, that there's a lot going on in Washington. Put your cynicism aside. There's a lot going on in Washington that's meaningful to your businesses, to your employees and your customers. And it's critically important to get engaged. So get to know your lawmakers. We're happy to help in any way. Get to know your lawmakers, talk to them about what your business needs, because there's things that they can do to help streamline operations and make things make a little bit more sense. And that's worth your time.
Really, the community piece, I couldn't agree more, and really kind of being an active listener, as my dad always used to say to me, you have 2 ears and only 1 mouth for a reason, so listen twice as much as you talk. But also on the public policy side and engaging with lawmakers, it has really struck me in being part of RILA how often you've brought very senior political aides to the conversation. First off, how grateful they are to the retail community for the jobs and the employment that the retailers have been providing, but also asking questions to the retailers in terms of how to think about future policy. So engaging there versus pushing away or coming in with a fixed mindset is engagement is definitely the better choice.
Yeah, we operate in an ecosystem, right? So there's lots of players in the ecosystem. There's government, there's non-government, there's terrific partners like Microsoft and you. And I think it's important for businesses to recognize the importance of constant engagement with others in their ecosystem. It can only benefit, even if you can't always find agreement. It's good to know each other and to find areas of commonality whenever you possibly can.
Absolutely. Well, Brian, first off, we'll make sure we put the link for the McKinsey study on 7 imperatives, because I thought it was, really very well put together research. So we'll make sure we share that with this broader community. But mostly, really what I want to thank you for is your leadership and your presence today. I know it's a very busy day for you and a busy time, but really thanks for what you're doing, certainly for Microsoft, but more importantly for retail and for the communities out there.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your partnership. I've enjoyed this.
Absolutely. For all of you who are tuning in for another episode of Taking Stock Live, a huge thank you to you. We know you're investing your time with us. We want to continue to make this content what you want to hear about. So always feel free to put a message in LinkedIn if there's something more you want me or the team to cover. But mostly now, as I close out, I just want to thank you for your time and for tuning in.